Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the closing day of the Culture and Well-Being Forum. The forum is organized by the Cluj Cultural Center and its partners Bozar, the Maribor City Gallery, and the Bruno Kessler Foundation, that all have been working together within the Art and Well-Being project for the last 2 years. I'm happy to introduce the morning with a very special moment from a very special person. A keynote from Professor Pier Luigi Sacco. As we all know, in the kind of small circle of those really passionate about culture and well-being, as one of the leading experts in this area. An economist, an amazing researcher that have found a lot of interest and passion for culture and how culture can support various aspects in the development of our society. I'm happy to give the floor now to Professor Pier Luigi Sacco, who is a senior researcher at the Bruno Kessler Foundation, also a senior researcher for OECD. He has been also supporting and advising a lot of international and national organizations around these topics of culture and well-being. So, Professor Pier Luigi Sacco, we are looking at you to learn a bit more from your experience and with this topic, and to help us get an overview of what is the status of the art in the field, but also to give us some perspectives. What would be, from your perspective, the steps to take?
Thank you very much, Rarița. It's a real pleasure to be with you to speak about a topic that today is really crucial for the policy agenda of the future. Certainly in Europe, this has been widely recognized, is now one of the key points of the new European agenda for culture. And it's already finding a vast space in the European programming for this 21-27 cycle. So an issue of enormous relevance. I will also take this opportunity to present a snapshot of a research that we have conducted during the Arts and Wellbeing project, which has to do exactly with the role that culture and cultural participation has had in supporting the well-being and the mood state of people during the height of the pandemic crisis in the spring of 2020. And that would be, in particular, I think, a convenient illustration of some of the phenomena of the issues that I will speak about before, to explain why this topic is relevant today and how it relates to the agenda. We have to start from one fact. We have been doing a lot of research in terms of what is the relationship between certain forms of cultural participation and well-being and health outcomes. But most of this research has been, and it's inevitable at the first stage, conducted at the behavioral level of trying to understand what is the association between certain activities and certain states. What is much less clear is what are the underlying processes. So in some sense, we are understanding a bit about the how, we are understanding still a little less about the why. And this is important because this is the future. So it's extremely fundamental today to learn what are the specific pathways through which certain types of cultural activity have an impact on our emotional processes, cognitive processes, bio-behavioral processes. And this needs a new alliance between the behavioral sciences, neuroscience, medical sciences and professions, and of course, the cultural professions. So it's probably now the most ambitious and exciting prospect for the future. And it's important to understand where we are and what are the first lines the first inspirations that we have to pursue this particular line, which is not simply research, but it's fundamental to design effective interventions. Because if we don't understand the mechanisms, we cannot really be on the mark for specific tailored interventions. Just to make an example, we know that, for example, dance is useful for Parkinson patients. But what are the specific pathways? What happens exactly in Parkinson patients, and how can we fine-tune, for example, certain types of experiences, interventions, to be more and more effective, and, for example, also to differentiate between the specific characteristics. Characteristics are one thing and biology is the other thing, but that's not true. We know today that, for example, all forms of social exclusion create certain forms of inflammatory response from our body. So, and even a very detectable change in genetic expression. So we understand that there are at this point even epigenetic effects of experiences. So it's extremely important to know these connections much better than we do today. Where do we start from? What we are understanding? One thing that emerges that seems to be particularly interesting in this regard has to do with, in some sense, how we have got it wrong in terms of the role of cultural human experience. Because sometimes from mistakes, you also understand, in some sense, what is the grain of truth that should be said. We tend to think, for example, that culture is not so important for our living because it's something that is related to leisure and free time. So something that is disposable. You have it, but if you have to sacrifice something, that's the first thing you drop, because of course there are stronger urgencies, and leisure is in some sense a luxury, something that you can only afford in special circumstances. This is a mistake because culture is much more fundamental than this, and we will have a brief consideration about this, what we know, not just the wishful thinking. But there is one aspect in this identification between culture and leisure that is important. Think of our leisure time and think, for example, of the distinction that we humans make between, for example, working time and leisure time. What is the difference that we experience between working time and leisure time? And think how this relates to the classical attitudes that we all have, like, wow, it's Friday, which means I have a couple of days in front of me in which I can be myself. Or hopefully, sometimes you have lots of things to do anyway, but so there is an invasion of working time even in leisure time. But ideally, that's the attitude. Fantastic, I have something really beautiful in front of me. Whereas, of course, our attitude when we start a new work week is, of course, oh my God, this is Monday morning. So what is the attitude from this point of view? It's like we have two different channels of psychological state and experience that we could call the festive time and the weekday time. The weekday time is something that is characterized by a series of duties and urgencies and things to do. The festive time is a situation in which our inner rhythm changes completely, and we, for example, find space for fantasizing, for doing things that we really like, literally to mind wander in completely different kinds of situations. Well, what we know today from the studies on the early forms of cultural experience of humans have established a clear connection between this festive time and the space of culture. This festive time is something in which you literally enter a new channel, enter a new world, so to speak, from the psychological point of view. This is something like that, for example, a famous cultural social anthropologist, Eric Di Sarayake, called making special. The moment in which we evade from the cage of our everyday activity. The point is that when we do this, our own biological functioning changes. For example, there is a very strong relationship between this daydreaming activity and the state in which we naturally enter when we are not particularly absorbed by any specific task, which is the default state of the so-called default mode network. So the default state of our neural system is a state of mind wandering. That's not the only one. We should not identify the mind wandering of the default mode network with the essence of this second channel, the festive channel, so to speak, of our mental and emotional experience, but clearly this is one important aspect of it. So what I'm saying is that mind wandering, it's a state that is normal for humans. It's not the contrary. The absorbed state that has to do with daily tasks and chores is not our default state. Our default state is mind wandering. So what does this mean? That we need this particular state of mind wandering to maintain our own psychological integrity. If we do not delve into the state long enough, we are compromised in terms of our mental health. It's not only something that has to do with coping and regulation, not unlike, by the way, what happens with dreaming, but it's also a state in which, in some sense, we restructure our vision of the world from an external viewpoint. For example, we understand our environment better. We know today, for example, that culture has had an enormous importance in the development of the cognitive structure of so-called predictive brain of humans, understanding our environment and using, for example, all aspects of cultural experience to improve our capacity to understand what comes next. For example, the use of fiction in understanding the functioning of complex social situations and learning to decipher what is in the mind of others. But even music, we know today, the basic cognition activities that are related to music have to do, for example, with a constant exercise of our brain, trying to predict what comes next in terms of the melodic and harmonic line. So why do we have this focusing on prediction? Because predictive capacity is fundamental to the survival, not only of our ancestors in the savannah, of course, where you had very, very tough choices in terms of energy intake, capacity to use this energy to escape a predator or to chase a prey. But this is, of course, extremely important for every living being in every kind of environment. So what I'm saying, and unfortunately in a very compact way because we have little time, but what I'm saying is that we are understanding that there is a specific state of mind that is related not only to cultural activities, but all the activities that have to do with making special. And these activities are fundamental to improve our capacity to cope with our environment and to successfully live in our environment. What are the other examples of experiences that belong to this making special channel? For example, transcendence and meditation. For example, traveling. When you travel for leisure, you enter a special state. That's one of the reasons why people like traveling, because it's like seeing the world from another angle. You go to places you are not familiar with. But also romantic love. That's another way of, let's say, escaping from the common routine. But also sports and play. So you see that there are several different activities in which humans make it special. And the point is that when the way in which we react to situation in this spatial context changes our way of functioning in our ordinary living. So the fact that we are able to inhabit this specific dimension in ways that are for us meaningful and appealing and fulfilling has an enormous impact on our biological and psychological functioning in a variety of different spheres. This is in some sense, the basic intuition that we need to dig deeper now in terms of what are the specific structures of this special time, of this special channel of psychological function. In this regard, the pandemic has been a sort of immense natural experiment, because we have found ourselves in a situation in which this channel of making special was so important, but also so threatened. Because one could say, okay, you were locked in your house and you had no chance whatsoever to go away and do whatever. So that's a fantastic and ideal opportunity, for example, for indulging in your favorite hobbies. Not at all. Because as we know, it's true that we were locked in our houses, but at the same time, we were under a burden of anxiety and uncertainty about the future that was so overwhelming that for many people, that was a prison. It was not a situation in which you would comfortably feel at home. So it was absolutely not granted that this kind of experience would improve your well-being. So what we did with our research was to make a test, but a test that specifically targeted not just every kind of individual, because of course, clearly the reaction is different depending on what is your familiarity with culture. We targeted specifically people living in an urban environment, relatively young, with high educational attainment, and at the same time with some familiarity with cultural participation. In some sense, the best of possible worlds from this point of view. Not because this is normative in any sense. Other people should, in some sense, be discriminated because they are not like that, of course. But because we wanted to understand, at least in the best possible conditions, what was the capacity for culture to, for example, function as a powerful coping resource. This means that if this is the case and we can promote new forms of social and economic inclusion plus cultural participation, and at the same time think of culture as a powerful coping resource, this is of course an interesting benchmark test for our further activities of improvement of cultural participation and improvement of socioeconomic inclusion, how they improve from this point of view the coping capacity of subjects. So we were in particular interested in understanding what was the relationship between the state, the pandemic lockdown state. We in particular collected data in May and July, across May, July 2020. So spring, early summer, which was, as we know, the peak of the pandemic in 2020 in terms of the development cycle. And in particular, we used a scale, which is interesting in this regard because it's a scale that considers both positive and negative affect, in particular the so-called IPANAS scale, the International Active and Negative Affect Scale, International Positive and Negative Affect Schedule, and which has 5 positive affects, which are active, determined, attentive, inspired, and alert, and 5 negative states, which are afraid, nervous, upset, hostile, and ashamed. And we saw what was, first of all, the relationship between the pandemic state and this particular affect and the relationship with forms of cultural access and participation. So the first thing that's interesting, in our benchmark, initially, our sample before the pandemic shock were in good psychological state. Most of these people reported a good psychological well-being. However, what happened, and that was not particularly surprising, was that, of course, negative affect increased, especially being afraid and upset during the pandemic, and positive affect decreased. So we clearly had a problem of mood regulation here. What has been the effect of cultural participation from this point of view? First of all, we can say that the most sought activities for coping purposes were access to art and social contacts. So it's interesting that there is this powerful relationship that, by the way, is most commonly found Cultural participation and art are particularly meaningful when they also have a social dimension. When they synergize, it's even better. And overall, there has been an increase in cultural affect in this particular demographics. So people who are already very well socialized into cultural activities and highly educated people. But what is really interesting is that both in terms of receptive participation, one of the noticeable effects was a decrease in negative feeling and an improved mood, psychological mood, and a special relationship with the sense of beauty and awe. And for active participation, it was a higher positive effect and a sense of bigger significance, improved mood, and improved social connections. So we see very clearly that in a situation in which our making special is threatened because we are in an exceptional situation of environmental threat, the capacity to leverage upon the regulatory power of cultural participation, both in receptive, passive, and active forms, is extremely powerful if people, at least if people are already well socialized into cultural experience. Of course, it can be very different for people who have less familiarity with cultural participation, and we are less inclined to participate. So from this point of view, clearly, it would be extremely important to have a big study in which we can really compare how these coping strategies fare in situations in which levels of cultural participation before the shock differ. So, and I expect that, of course, a lower participation also corresponds initially to lower capacity to cope through cultural experience. Because again, like any other human activity, this has to do with capabilities. We have to acquire capabilities for this. But this means that there is an incredibly promising avenue in terms of cultural empowerment, and in particular on how we can improve the capacity of people to participate, not by paternalistically prescribing them what to do, but simply by expanding the menu of opportunity and possibility. Because what we know that is that every human being is interested in making special, so to speak. Every human being is interested in staying in this particular psychological state that is this, what we call this festive channel. The point is that, of course, different individuals occupy this channel in different ways. Expanding our capacity to structure the experiences in the festive channel in ways that are richer, that are more varied, that are also, in some sense, responding to some underperceived needs of the individual. Because sometimes the reason why people use their time only in specific ways has to do with the fact that they don't simply perceive that there is an alternative. And of course, this is us also perverse lock-in phenomena. But once we really expand the range of possibilities, for example, in terms of cultural participation, this can really bring about a considerable improvement in psychological quality of psychological well-being, in mood regulation, and of course, in positive versus negative affect. So this is just an example, because clearly, again, as I said, we are at the very beginning. But it's an example that explains so clearly why there is today a natural connection between public health policies and cultural policies. And this is something that is still not so clearly understood. We have fantastic research in terms of studies, even randomized studies on the effectiveness of cultural participation, but this does not naturally lead to the idea that, for example, a full-fledged salutogenic approach, a full-fledged approach for the promotion of health at the population scale should have culture as one of the major levers. So this is the kind of revolution that we need to accomplish with this cycle of the European programming. And this needs better insights in terms of the underlying mechanisms. So in this short lecture, I didn't have the time, of course, to explore in depth these aspects, but what I'm saying is that we should expect a future extremely exciting dialogue between cognitive and social neuroscientists, psychologists and behavioral scientists, even cultural economists, and public health specialists and medical professionals in working together in this new synthesis. And I think we have the luck of living in very exciting times if we are interested in these specific topics, because this is really probably the watershed period in terms of what will be regarded in a few years from now as a turning point in our understanding of the impact of arts and culture for human well-being. If there are any questions, or I'm of course happy to respond to that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Pier Luigi. It has been incredibly insightful for me, and I'm sure for all of us to listen to this perspective. We have always been looking at and speaking about the intrinsic value of art, and at times when we look at the possibilities that culture brings for health and well-being, we tend to believe that culture is being instrumentalized, but the type of insights that you brought into this conversation show how much the inner mechanisms, the type of value that culture produces intrinsically, are actually key for the way in which we extract meaning and joy through life, and that seems to be an incredible potential for the conversation that we are having. As we are moving very soon to the next stage of our morning, I just have one question. We are now starting a policy discussion. If you were a policymaker, can you give us, I'm sure it's simplifying, but maybe one or two measures that you would take to kind of promote this potential?
Well, I think that today we are at the start of a new cohesion policy. I would urge the regions that are more prepared for this to include cultural welfare into their smart specialization strategies, because this could really bring about fantastic consequences in terms of focusing not only research, but really experimentation and activity, also because I expect a flourishing and new professional profiles related to this particular area. So really just linking this to smart specialization means the possibility of expanding dramatically the range of possibility for cultural professionals, but also at the same time striking new deals, for example, between the cultural and the welfare and the medical and public health field. Think, for example, that all the savings from improved coping and mental well-being of people that come from less sanitary expenditure could be used to finance more cultural activity, just to make an example. So I would also encourage some innovative contracts, innovative agreements between cultural and health institutions. That's where I would place my attention now.
Thank you so much. This is really useful to hear. So rather to invest in, let's say, happiness by supporting culture, and also I understand that you say that this is a very complex field, so it means rather to have local strategies to integrate this in various chapters of policy at the level of a city or of a region. Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much, Pier Luigi.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, and I'm always so much more excited about this work after such a dialogue. I'm now transiting to our next moment, which is a policy dialogue about how to scale up the already proven successful projects that use art for promoting well-being and health. And for this, I will introduce as moderator my colleague Ștefan Teișanu. And just to say once more that all this is happening within the Culture and Wellbeing Forum is an event that the Cluj Cultural Center started in 2018. But at this moment, this edition is dedicated to presenting the results, but also the experiences from other projects across Europe and in the world on the relationship between arts, culture, and well-being. The project that we have been working on is called Art and Well-Being. Is a project supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. Local activities in Romania have been also supported by the municipality of Cluj-Napoca and the Ministry of Culture in Romania. The entire project has been a partnership with two other prominent art institutions in Europe, namely the Center for Fine Arts in Brussels, Botnar, and the Maribor City Gallery in Slovenia, and a research institute, the Bruno Kessler Foundation in Italy, represented by Pier Luigi Sacco, by the Professor Pier Luigi Sacco. Our project has actually had three main focus areas. Primarily, we had an experimental approach. We started and we designed this project before the pandemic. The pandemic kind of put more focus, more light on the importance of the work that we proposed to do within the project. But of course, it also changed our plans. It allowed less direct participatory real-time events than we would have liked to have. But we have managed to adapt and still propose an interesting artistic program that happened mainly in the venues of the art partners of the project, that consisted in exhibitions, performances, and artistic residencies. And besides this, we have been also looking on experimental model pilot projects of what we call now cultural prescriptions, different models adapted for each partners to their own context and their artistic programming strategies. We also try to understand how arts can support well-being through the design of spaces, and this is also a place where we had different approaches. While our partners like Botnar and UGM, being visual arts, mainly visual art centers, they have created spaces where people could interact with art. For instance, in Cluj, we worked in partnership with artists and architects and urban planners and educators to co-design a space for senses, a multisensorial space dedicated to art and education in one of the primary schools in the city. We are now also focusing through research, which is this second pillar of our project, to the effects that all these pilot projects have been producing in order to understand how to further go on to improve this type of projects and reach further impact by scaling up, by proposing wider and longer term programs and even policy proposals. And a third focus area has been the one of dialogues, among which this forum, but also a series of local artists and scientists dialogues to help us get together in fruitful collaborations. That being said, I'm really happy that we have this opportunity to continue the conversation with really distinguished guests, which my colleague Ștefan Teișanu will introduce in a second.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to have you here. Hopefully next year we'll be able to meet in person. We used to do that starting with 2018, as my colleague Rarița just mentioned, but since the pandemic, we're of course running this forum online. Rarița, I'm inviting you to stay here with us and join the conversation as well. My name is Ștefan Teișanu. I'm the Executive Director of the Cluj Culture Center, and I will be supporting you today by moderating this conversation, which I'm very much looking forward to. Yesterday, we had, in the first day of the Culture and Well-Being Forum, we had 3 very interesting conversations. The first one was dedicated to research in the field. The second one was dedicated to cultural practices, artistic practices, and how cultural institutions are working or could improve their work to promote culture as well-being to more and larger audiences. And the third one was specifically dedicated to cultural interventions for health. And today we are trying to take one step forward and to look at how this sort of cultural interventions, cultural practices, pilot projects on culture and well-being, on arts and health all across the continent could be scaled up and taken to the next level. So and for that we have here some very distinguished guests, which I'm happy to meet again, and they will bring their perspective from various points of view, various and very representative stakeholders in this field. So I am very happy to welcome here Monica Urian from the European Commission, Policy Officer for Culture and Well-Being at the Directorate-General for Education, Culture, Youth and Sport. Nils from the World Health Organization, from the Behavior and Cultural Insights Unit at the Regional Office. Happy to see you again, Nils. Leena, which I haven't seen in a few years, representing the city of Oulu, future capital, European capital of culture in 2026 for Finland, with a very interesting local program on culture and well-being. We also have here with us Kornelia from Culture Action Europe, one of our new partners. We are very happy to start working with you, and we're looking forward to hearing about your efforts in advocacy in this field of work. And of course, Barbara, our partner from the foundation Botnar, a private foundation that makes an important work in the field as well. So we will be trying to look at these various level perspectives on how would we be able to scale up successful pilot projects and interventions from Europe and take them to a larger audience, and to maybe diminish the differences between this sort of practices in European countries. So we will start with Monica. Very much looking forward to hearing what's going on. How do we see these things from the European Commission?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Bună dimineața. Many thanks for this invitation. It's a pleasure to work with Cluj. This is the city where I studied, and it's a pleasure to be with you, even if only virtually. As you said, maybe in the future occasions we will meet face to face. Indeed, I'm a policy officer in the European Commission for Culture and Well-Being. It's an honor indeed, but also I work on international cultural relations and on the freedom of artistic expression, and somehow all these fields are interconnected. I want to congratulate you, first of all, for being sort of revolutionary. I mean, art and well-being, your project has replied immediately to the new European Agenda for Culture, and is one of the very first projects supported by Creative Europe, at least that I know of, tackling this important topic. We hope that now with the new Creative Europe program will have a lot more projects in this field, and we'll have an even bigger knowledge base to learn from. But we very much look forward to learning with your experience, and that's why this forum, I think, is very important. So I think I have about 8 minutes. I'll try to give you a brief overview about how we are, where is our thinking in this topic at the moment. Of course, as we heard yesterday and this morning from Professor Sacco, we have a lot of data from different disciplines, from neuroscience, from social science, from the healthcare sector, and from the culture sector itself. And we have a lot of experimentation in the field. The question is, what do we do now about policy making in this area? Because it's still quite new to put these two sectors together, culture and health, and I think we have a long way to go. First of all, from the European Union point of view, of course, well-being and health are now explicit EU goals. So maybe you know that the Article 3 of the Treaty of the EU says that the Union's aim is to promote peace, its values, and the well-being of its peoples. So I think we are spot on. Nobody could how to say, not take into account this noble aim of the EU, and therefore this opens the ground for a lot of policy work. Moreover, there are, of course, in the treaty references to health, and in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, we also have mention to preventive health care and, of course, health protection. And then we have, of course, the EU's Sustainable Development Strategy. And as you know, the SDG 3 is promoting healthy lives and well-being for all at all ages. So we have a lot of ground coming even from the health and human rights angle. And now if we talk exclusively about cultural policy work, where which is more my field, as I said, in the new European Agenda for Culture that was published in 2018, the first pillar is to harness the power of culture for social cohesion and well-being. And in that sense, we want to foster cultural capability of European citizens. And this is an important philosophical angle, I could say, that we intend to further explore in the future, because it's very much linked to audience development, which have worked a lot in the past, but it also becomes more political. And we were inspired by the works of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum in terms of the capability, this capability notion, which is not passive, but it's quite an active approach. So that the capability to achieve well-being and to work to achieve human dignity through participating in culture. I think it's an important thing to remember. From this new European Agenda for Culture, which is of course the Commission blueprint for culture policy for the next years. The previous agenda for culture was in 2007, so we have like a 10-year cycle, more or less. Then we implemented through with various partners, and of course the important partners in this field for us are the member states, because as you may know, the European Commission and the European Union per se do not have a mandate for cultural policy at the European level, but we work very much hand in hand with the member states. And in 2018, the member states decided to work again on this topic, cohesion and well-being, as being one of the 6 main topics of the work plan for culture between 2018 and 22. So you see, everything is coming together. Different EU institutions decide that culture and well-being and health are important topics to follow. And in this setting, we organized last year online, due to the pandemic, a workshop for the member states, experts from the culture ministry and other connected ministries And Professor Sacco was the expert invited to provide the theoretical background for two panels in the seminar. One was on culture and aging, and the other one was on culture, health, and well-being, and they are very much related. And thank you, Professor Sacco. I don't know if you are still with us. And then the third pillar in this European institution overview is the European Parliament, who has asked us to work on a preparatory action, and they gave us the budget to do so. So we have 500,000 euros, and for 18 months we are going to work on this, again, topic on culture and well-being and health, involving very much the local level. So we have launched this preparatory action at the beginning of the year. We have, again, inspired ourselves from the work of Professor Sacco and also from the World Health Organization scoping review that was mentioned yesterday from 2019, which is, I think, the first international document that is really checking a vast array of literature and undisputably proving this link in current research. And Nils is surely going to talk about it later. So with this preparatory action, we are preparing our future work in this field. We have asked the sector, it was an open call for proposals. So we have asked the sector to come up with proposals to implement various tasks. The first task was the research task, because we need to understand, to go even beyond maybe the WHO scoping review, and to understand it from a cultural angle. What is the latest state of research in this field, and including the COVID-19, of course, data that many speakers already mentioned, and including, of course, your own work in this field of the Arts and Wellbeing project. And then we also want to have a mapping of the EU national, regional, and local initiatives and programs, because yeah, we know there is a lot of evidence and there are a lot of initiatives and projects, but they are rather scattered. So it's quite difficult, I think, for anyone at this moment to have a very clear overview of everything that is going on, including in our own EU programs. And the fact that you had a Horizon project yesterday is very telling. We have Creative Europe, but we have for sure many other projects in different programs, including in regional policy, in regional funds, and so on. And we also want to have pilot projects, cross-sectorial and cross-border, of course, because this is where we act in the cross-border space. And then, of course, a lot of work of dissemination. And my colleague from Culture Active Action Europe is going to talk about this later on. The contract, they have been selected to implement this preparatory action, but the contract is about to be signed. So for the moment, we speak under this circumstance. I think the time is running. So as I said, this is the cultural policy work. There is a intersection on which we work with, of course, the Creative Europe program, and now with all the other programs that we are going to have as an input from this preparatory action, with all the information that we are going to gather. And then in parallel, many different other Commission initiatives are going to feed and hopefully are going to be fed by us. Like, for example, the new European Bauhaus, which is a very important Commission initiative aiming to improve the quality of living experience. So it's very much linked to well-being and health, of course. And I would maybe sum it up, hoping that also the recovery and resilience funds are going to work very much on this topic, because the member states now have from the EU a lot of leverage and a lot of funding to. So it's up to them to include this topic in their sectors in which they want to invest. And I would maybe leave it at that, because we will have a discussion later on, and I would conclude with Louise Bourgeois, a quote from Louise Bourgeois, who said, "Art is not about art, art is about life," and that sums it up. Thank you, and back to you, Ștefan.
Thank you, Monica. Very interesting insights. Yes, we will have a 30 minutes conversation after the short presentations, but I will want to ask you something right now. Just before doing that, I will remind the people who are here with us on this Zoom link or are watching us on our Facebook page that they can also ask questions, and my colleagues will help me get these questions and bring them to you in the second half of our conversation. My question is the following. So culture has always been transversal, not a direct thread, not a direct priority in European agenda, and the European Commission doesn't have, as you mentioned, a direct management, so to say, in culture policies, because they are up to each country. And now we have well-being kind of on the same level. It's also very transversal. And when we bring these two transversalities together, it seems to me that we have something very complex to manage. And how do we actually accelerate specific projects, like very concrete projects, projects that can be scaled up? How can we actually accelerate that when we don't have direct lines of support? What's your view on that?
Well, direct lines of support, I think we do have. Maybe you mean that of course, us from the culture sector, we know very well what we are talking about, and we have very clear arguments about the importance of culture for well-being and health. Now it's maybe a challenge to work with other partners. And I think yesterday there were many interesting interventions about this topic on how to work with hospitals, with social security, and how to do that more. I think it's a lot of work, of course. Yes, that's the beauty, but also the difficulty in working in a transversal field. You need to talk to a lot of different people from different sectors, and it takes time. But I think, I joined the Commission in 2007, and I always worked on culture. And this was the very first time when we had the European Agenda for Culture that year. And I have been amazed in these last years how much we have achieved. And why? Because we worked with all, for example, in the European Commission, with all other Directorates-General, whether they work on agriculture, on taxation, on regional policy, on international affairs. We work with all other Directorate Generals in the Commission, and of course we work a lot with all the other institutions. So it's work. It's like really making the case on our side, on your side, of course. So I encourage you to keep doing that. And bringing evidence, measuring, trying to measure as much as we can. I know I'm all for the intrinsic value, and I think we are really preaching among the converted here. But you also have to understand, other ways of looking at this, maybe from other ministries or other sectors. If you're talking about the national level, like. You go to the finance ministry, maybe you have to bring other arguments. But I think together we managed to go really far. And now, of course, in the post-COVID world, the situation became a little bit, again, difficult and maybe a bit chaotic, but it's going in the right direction, I think.
Okay, thank you. So there is no magic solution. It's just doing the same work of joining various partnerships and expanding more and more. Okay, thank you. We move to Nils now. Nils, for the first time I met you, you were launching the glorious report in Helsinki, and since then I'm really happy that we have worked together on various initiatives, and I will take this moment to thank you for all this. That meeting that was very inspiring for us in Cluj, and it helped us a lot. What were you up to in this time in the World Health Organization?
Thanks, Ștefan, and thanks also very much. I mean, I think the pleasure has been all ours, really. So thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you, and for all the things that you've enabled us to do. I will say a little bit about the report. You mentioned it already. It is a couple of years old, but I think it still continues to be an important part of what we do. But I'll also say a little bit about the specific work that we're doing with Romania, with your center in particular, in an effort to do exactly what it says, what this forum is problematizing, which is the question about scaling up. So I'm going to endeavor to share my screen, or share a slide. It wouldn't be a WHO presentation without a PowerPoint. So I can't see anything anymore now. So can I just make sure that you can see my slide deck, and then that is working?
Yes, it's perfect. Working.
Fantastic. Okay. So Monica ended on a quote. I'm going to start on a quote. I'm going to quote the famous French painter and sculptor Georges Braque, who once summarized the relationship between the arts and health in a way that I think only an artist can. Art, he said, is a wound turned into light. And I think that's it's a profoundly beautiful way of connecting art and health for very obvious reasons. And it's worth remembering that long before humans even knew about penicillin and genetics, they created music and art. And I think it's fair to say that our need to express our hopes and fears, to create meaning from our surroundings, and to share this through artistic creations with others is probably as profound as our need to quench our thirst or still our hunger. So I think we probably shouldn't be surprised that art can improve health, and we probably shouldn't be surprised that art can also give us well-being. I'm going to focus a little bit down within this presentation. As I said, I'm going to say a little bit about the report, but our particular interest has been in relation to health interventions. So we published this report in 2019, and the report is a really large-ranging scoping review that looks at all kinds of study designs, all kinds of methodologies, covers over 3,000 publications, and looks at the evidence across the life course and the continuum of care about how health and well-being can be affected by the art. Now, it does so. It looks at the evidence on kind of two levels. On the one level, there is the kind of way in which we've, I think, been talking about this up until now, which is the kind of more high-level way in which cultural participation and whether active or passive, i.e., whether you're kind of drawing a painting or passively reading a book, how that kind of cultural participation can have a health effect. And the report does show the evidence behind that. So there is an increasing amount of evidence to show that just participating in culture can have a health and well-being effect. But what we have been a bit more focused on at WHO, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the way in which specifically designed cultural interventions or arts interventions can actually have an important health benefit in relation to particular health challenges. So we looked at the performing arts, we looked at visual arts, including design and craft, literature, culture, online, digital, and electronic arts, a really wide range of interventions or intervention spaces to look for evidence where these kinds of interventions are promising. So maybe just one one more quick word around the kind of the layout of the report. It's kind of divided into two, or you could probably say four sections, two of which are around management and treatment of disease, and the other two are about prevention of ill health and promotion of health. And within all of these spaces, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but within all of these spaces, there's good evidence, sometimes very good evidence, that arts interventions can actually have an important health benefit. And maybe one thing I am going to point out here is that this is particularly true in relation to mental illness and mental health. For instance, it can help support recovery from perinatal mental illness and after trauma and abuse. And I'm going to focus at the end of my presentation on an intervention that looks at postpartum depression and how arts and health interventions can work with that. Now, this is maybe the most important slide in relation to scaling up, as it were, and it ties into some of the things that Pier Luigi was saying about the importance of governments recognizing that arts can be something that they can integrate into their either into their smart specialization strategies, as he was suggesting, or really even within their kind of specific health remits and health strategies, and in maybe thinking about things like social prescribing as are being trialed in places like Sweden and the UK. But basically, we came up with three policy considerations that healthcare policymakers might want to look at. First and foremost, we want to point to the evidence. There are some interventions which just have really good clinical evidence behind them. By any standards, they are interventions that are worth looking at closely. Often they have very little cost, almost no side effects, and can be very inexpensive. An example here is, for instance, that there's extremely good evidence to show that patients who are pre-operative, if they listen to music, or if they're helped to listen to music, that can have a quantifiable, a measurable impact on their recovery rates post-surgery. So something as simple as just listening to music, I mean, literally something that can be implemented from one day to the next, can actually make a difference. So these kinds of evidence, this kind of evidence, I think, is important to become aware of and and start propagating through the healthcare system. The other important policy consideration that we wanted to draw our attention to is one that's been discussed a few times now. It's about cross-sectoral awareness. So this is directed at the arts and culture kind of space, and this is to say, you know, that the arts and cultural institutions should think health. They should recognize that this can be an important part of their mission. So if you are a museum, for instance, you might not historically have considered the health benefits that your space can provide, but it should be something that you should, well, our report at least can make you aware of. For instance, there's very good evidence, once again, that specifically designed guided tours for people with dementia or Alzheimer's, and that these specifically designed guided tours can help alleviate some of the symptoms, can improve well-being, but can also slow down some of the dementia deterioration that might occur. So again, this is a kind of new way also for these kinds of spaces to think that health can be an important part of their strategy. And finally, we kind of really buckle down on the importance of cross-sectoral involvement here. It is really not traditionally, there are no strong traditional bridges between the arts sector, the arts and culture sector, and the social / health sectors. And this is really something that needs to be strengthened. Money needs to flow between these two better. Co-funding needs to happen better. All these things are limitations at the moment, limitations that mean that arts and health interventions often fall between the cracks because they're neither one nor the other, or they get shoved from one side to the other. and this is something that really needs to happen on a kind of policy level. So I'm going to finish with just a brief overview of a project that we've been working on. I mentioned before that the intervention about postpartum depression and arts and health. So this is an intervention that was designed and first trialed in the UK. It's based on an intervention that's developed there, and it helps to support mothers who are experiencing postnatal depression. And it basically works by bringing these mothers into a singing group and through taking them through several sessions over the course of 10 to 12 weeks, and helping them bond with their children and also with each other, providing social support in a non-threatening, kind of extremely supportive environment. This is one of these interventions for which there's extremely good clinical data. There's a randomized controlled trial that shows statistically meaningful effect on moderate to severe sufferers of postnatal depression or postpartum depression. So really good clinical evidence. And we're now looking to implement this in 2 countries, in Denmark and Romania, where the cultural contexts are obviously quite different. And I'm so pleased that the Cluj Cultural Center is helping us with the implementation of this in the ground. We hope to be starting with the intervention in the early next year, COVID permitting and so forth. But we're also kind of in the process of creating a protocol that perhaps others can follow, whether these are others in Romania, but possibly also others across the European context. And I think this is a really critical, coming back to scaling up, I think this is a really critical question around how do we scale up interventions that are so deeply, that we intuitively think are so deeply linked to a particular cultural context. How do we scale these up not only within that country, but into other countries as well? So how do you take something like a singing intervention and make it work in a different cultural context? And that's really what we're trying to figure out with this project. So I wonder, Ștefan, I have a video that I'd like to show. It shows us the first person perspective of somebody who's a participant in this intervention. It's a really beautiful story. I'd love to show it, but it is 4 minutes long. Do you think we have time for that?
If you will give me your answers to my question in less than 1 minute after, we can take the movie. Yeah.
Let's do that then. Let's also see if it works. Let's make that the deciding factor. If it doesn't in fact work, then I'll just post the link. Can I just make sure that you can see the video right now?
Yes, we see it. We see it.
Okay. So let's see if you'll also hear it. This tends to be the challenge. And then if you can't hear anything, let me know, and I'll just abandon this. You should be able to hear something.
When Cara was born,
we can hear it.
An overwhelming sense of isolation. It was just relentless, the lack of sleep and kind of feeling very out of control, and it can get very dark and very depressing. You need to demonstrate to them how they should be. So I wanted to really relearn to love myself and relearn to be a better person so that she can grow up seeing that I love myself, which I didn't before. I'm Charlotte. I've suffered from some postnatal depression recently, and I have a 7.5-month-old baby. So from the age of 30, I've had some very severe dips into depression and anxiety, culminating in one very bad attempt at suicide, which I'm not proud of, but it happened, and I wanted to move forward from that and never go back there. So I've worked very hard just recently with psychotherapists and with counselling to really combat the depression, which can just make you feel so worthless and useless which as a parent you can't feel like that. You really need to be strong for your baby. So the depression, really, like now, I want to fight it to keep it away.
My name's Cleo and I run Melodies for Mums, which is a singing group specifically for women who suffer from postnatal depression. The main thing is that they're not being so isolated and they're realising that they're not on their own. They're not the only ones that are going through these different challenges.
We didn't really need to talk about, you know, the depressing kind of facts that we were all struggling. We just had this wonderful positive experience at the other end. And we sound really good. We sound amazing, which was one of the revelations that lots of beginner singers, and it's just so uplifting, but they're real community songs about happiness and joy. And I feel that when I sing them. I feel really special and really good. And I'm just really glad that I went there and have tried to find different things that made me feel really good. And it's brought me and Cara closer. We're able to laugh and sing, and we have much more happy moments. And I can't say specifically that it's Melodies for Mums, but it's the feeling of that was one of the first places where I started to really enjoy spending time with my baby and doing things for us together. And that's been something that I will take with me from the class and forever.
Artsy side, and that means that we don't talk with them as often as we should. But this as a process, so it worked. And of course, as we know, it cannot cost anything extra. So this is something we have to work through. And because we are on the verge of very big demographic change as the rest of the Europe is also. And our cultural strategy, this is essential part of it, as well as this demographic change as we grow older and fainter. So we have to think other means of reaching people. In this is 60 pages, and I hope we get this translated into, to begin with, of course, English, Swedish, and Sami to begin with. And so we can start collaborating with everybody, and you don't have to base your information on me. We have 5 ladders and on which you step on. I'm sorry, I don't have any. And 5 ladders is that the first ladder what we aim is that we have this culture part of our social and health services. It will be an essential part, so that the also artists get part of the income from that side. That would be sort of fair. In this, people have been divided as on the Squid Game into different groups. There's green group, orange group, red group. This meeting, so you can read a book, perhaps even buy it, go to the library, and you know, and go to concerts, have friends to go with, as in the Finnish Symphony Orchestra's investigated in 17. So the biggest obstacle of not going was that people were lonely. It's a stigma to go somewhere alone. And you still can follow things. The orange things group means that it does not go that well for you. There might be sudden unemployment, sudden depression that takes you off. You perhaps don't have any friends, or they're not interested in the same things. And then the red is something that that's a group where the social, and there are different means how we do this. And of course, then comes the legislation as well. What we do, we took from Tampere region this 100 minutes of culture every week. It's 1% of your time. I know it sounds a lot, And that should keep you up and going. It means you read a book, you perhaps do handicrafts, listen to a concert, even from your TV or computer or whatever. I was actually thinking that is a lot, but it's in the end of the day, it's not that lot. It's just putting things into that. And then we have this social prescribing, as Nils mentioned, and that is actually kind of okay established here. And then we have what we Brits have are arts on prescription, and that has not yet really well rooted in. But we're working on that, and my intuition says that the health and social services need more information, what we do and why we do things, and what the artists can do and what they cannot do, and vice versa, of course. In Turku 2011, they had this arts on prescription, and I don't think it stuck, but it was very well received. And but we are in the beginning of this journey, and we shall see how it goes. And lots of things, what the video you showed us, the babies and mothers singing, our conservatories have done for decades this, that you go with your child to music school, although it does cost kind of a lot, but it's still been available. And I think all of us have done things that are correct, but now we're starting getting more research as we grow better on brains and how they function. I have 36 seconds time, Ștefan, but I'm sort of done. Is there any question you have?
Yes, I have a question. I am very passionate about budgets. So I would like to hear how did the city of Oulu, the city hall of Oulu manage that? Is this a local budget allocation for the program? Is it distributed to culture institutions? Is it distributed to other stakeholders? How are you funding this?
I think we fund it so that the institutions didn't get any extra also, and they've been doing this sort of work for when I ran the orchestra, but it felt like scratching a little bit water with your nail, because when you go on the field, you realize how big the need is, so it means you do as a family. So if you want to do this, you sort of like save from other places, so to say. You don't pay the conductor that much. And what I felt as rolling the big orchestra, dividing in smaller sections, I felt bad. I could not train them how to meet special groups, if you see what I mean. Sometimes I was totally without breath myself. We once went to this place where palliative care unit, wonderful, where people are, well, they go and die. They take 10 patients, it's by the river, it is beautiful, but still people die. And many of my players got huge anxiety about that. So every afternoon we had this, let's make some coffee and tea, and perhaps if somebody bakes a cake, and we talk it through. Of course, I'm not professional in that, but it was the only thing I could do, because it is rough, or you meet people who are handicapped. So how to meet them so that they are respected, because you go there like an actress improvising. Wonderful moments, touching moments, funny moments, but unprepared moments. But budget, we scratch it, but it's the healthcare, and there's been a donation. Somebody died and left us a will.
Okay, so the city hall is not actually strategically investing some money, putting some money in this plan, in this culture and well-being plan, but you're just trying to make it work with your own efforts. Okay, thank you very much, and we will move to Kornelia now. Culture Action Europe has been doing many efforts to advocate for culture and well-being and for other relevant topics for the culture sector. So please, in a few minutes, share us your ideas on that, your insights on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen. Works. Can you see my screen? I do like this.
Yes.
Yeah, this is what, okay, good. So Stefan was saying, I'm from Culture Action Europe, which is a major European cultural network. And what is maybe special about it is that we are really the only intersectoral network in culture. So many of our members are cultural organizations, artists, activists, academics, policymakers, but also many networks which are national networks or transnational networks. And we aim to put culture at the heart of public debate and decision making. Because we are, okay, how do you go to the next slide? As always. Sorry, I'm gonna share.
I will take this moment to kindly ask Nils to share in the chat for everyone the link to your to the WHO report, because there are several comments on various channels talking about that. Thank you. And we will take it to the Facebook page as well. Thank you.
So sorry for this. Now you can see it. It's always a trick when you have a Zoom and you want to make
maybe you don't go to full screen. Maybe you don't go to full screen, okay?
You see it now, right?
Yes, we see it, but I suggest you don't go to the full screen again.
Yes, I'm skipping that. As we are so cross-sectoral and intersectoral, definitely culture and well-being is something that is very crucial line for Culture Action Europe, as our main mission is really to mainstream culture across all EU policy fields, and of course also to advocate for a better cultural policy. So these two lines definitely places Culture Action Europe to work on this topic. How we do this, we of course advocate towards the European institutions, but also a very important part of our work is networking. So connecting the dots, connecting players, cultural players, also with players outside of the cultural sector, and also to monitor the research that is out there and trying to feed it into the European policymakers and others as well, also on UN level, let's say. So Culture Action Europe has been working on well-being at least since 2013, where we aim to have a work strand on measuring the impacts of arts in society. So we had a work stream on collecting indicators. We developed the Culture and Well-being Handbook, and we also tried to link cultural participation to well-being through a special tool. And we also try to have a bit of qualitative research in a way to collect stories about how culture impacts well-being through a project which is called Tell Us a Story. Getting back to Monica's input about the new agenda for culture, which came out in 2018, Culture Action Europe, of course, was there and provided advice or proposals or ideas also for the EU institutions. And we are very happy that also in this policy document, well-being was taken on board. And during the EU budget negotiations, when of course the next 7 years EU budget was decided, so really very just after or in line with the new agenda for culture, let's say, Culture Action Europe tried to have a campaign, of course, also advocating for higher budgets for culture. And I know, Ștefan, you are, as you said, you are interested in budgets. And of course, in order to substantiate why exactly culture would need higher budgets, we also issued an impact review, which is more of a collection of evidences of how culture contributes to other policy areas of the European Union. And at that time, of course, we were taking the priorities of the Commission before. So as you see, one of the chapters was on culture and well-being, and connected to this, we had, of course, a big social media campaign giving reasons why culture should be receiving higher amounts. And there in the side, you see that we were clearly putting the well-being aspects as well out there. And of course, we are happy that definitely our voice was heard, the cultural sector's voice was heard. And also there is in this EU budget cycle substantial increase, well, could be better, of course, as usual, for culture. So continuing that, we have been inputting on the Rome Charter and the Porto Santo Charter. We've been there present, helping. It was about increasing the cultural participation and also cultural democracy and cultural rights, so that all citizens have access to culture as well. And when COVID came, in our policy document, The Future of Culture and Creative Sectors in Post-COVID-19 Europe, we have, of course, pointed out these health and well-being aspects as well. We're pointing out the importance that, for example, Horizon also has a dedicated budget in this area, and we hope to see more on this one. During the pandemic, of course, the cultural sector was devastated, and we have been having deep interviews with our members in order to set up Culture Action Europe's next strategy as well, and of course also to understand how they fared within the COVID period. And from these discussions, it came out that the Culture Action Europe membership would really find it super important to work on well-being, which would include also access and participation in culture and cultural rights. So therefore, we can promise to everyone here that you will hear more of us in the coming years on advocacy for culture. And this is just a way to show you that, as you see, we have been, the whole cultural sector have been promoting these evidences and showing these evidences, and we hope to change this situation when everybody is just too busy doing their own little sectoral tasks and not thinking holistically. And of course, working holistically and transdisciplinary requires that we really remain open to change and embrace complexity. So therefore, we should we really need to work on these lines and hope to open the policy makers with many of our partners that I will show in the next slide to that Monica was talking earlier on, that was initiated by the European Parliament. It's a bottom-up policy development for culture and well-being in the EU. As said earlier, I have to say that currently the that the cultural sector, the health sector, and link it to Central Cultural Cluj, who is of course hosting this forum, but also Central Denmark region, WHO. So many, this is actually an organization established by the European Union as well, or co-funded by them. And you see they are present in all these countries which are listed on the slide. And what is interesting that they have a sister organization called the Northern Dimension Partnership in Public Health and Social Well-Being. And because they have this link to each other, we believe that we can reach as well in order to create synergies between the two sectors. Monica has mentioned what this call has to provide: desk research, mapping of projects, and cross-sector and cross-border cooperation. And the reason I'm talking here is also to let everyone know who is listening here of what these cooperation possibilities are. Just to see on a policy level, we really have to trigger change and find the change makers, both in management and treatment areas of intervention, but prevention and prevention areas of interventions on EU member state level, regional level, and linking all the sectors. So we really think that often, of course, it also depends on the interest, the people who can help to trigger this change. So the way the project has been set up is that we are going to organize study visits in Denmark, Italy, and Romania. We are going to connect the dots and bringing the cultural field to the health field and the health field to the cultural field by having these separate workshops, because we understand it is going to be a long process. And also towards the end of the project, involving EU decision makers and then a final conference trying to harvest the learnings from these meetings. So I hope that many of the people listening are going to be part of these processes. You can see here a couple of dates that we currently have an idea to have it if the contract is of course coming into force. Also important to mention the pilot projects that is also implemented through this action, where we again try to have both in the management and treatment category and in the prevention and promotion category to find projects which are through the life stages, through all the life stages of the human being. So from baby to adulthood to old age, let's say, or maturity. So I hope I managed to put it in 2 minutes in the end, but as you can see, it is quite a complex project. But I thought we should not miss the opportunity that everyone here listens and hears about this, so that you look out for it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kornelia. Yeah, it was very well. Please let us know if there is a link you want to share with the people listening or to the ones watching online. So we post it on the Facebook live stream as well. And of course, the presentation will reach all the people registered for the forum.
At this point, since the project just got selected but not even signed, we don't even have a website. But I think if you reach out to me or Cluj, I'm sure you will be able to find us. And yeah, probably through the Facebook group that you just created. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the tremendous work you've been doing for this, and not only for the project. We will Thank you. We are now looking forward to hearing the perspectives of a private actor, of a private foundation that is trying to support actions related to culture and well-being. We are very happy to be working with Fundația Botnar, and let's hear it from you.
Thank you, Ștefan, and thank you, Rarița, for this invitation. I really enjoyed listening to this session today. I know that we are, preaching to the convinced already, but I would like to share perhaps some of the novel approaches that we have been experimenting. Myself, or maybe let's start with the quote that's one of my favorite quotes, and many quotes have been cited. But I believe, as Buckminster Fuller said, to change something, let's build a new model that make existing models obsolete. I don't mean that we don't want to scale up intervention. Of course, all of us here want to do that and continue. Yet we all know that this is not going fast enough. And there is so much more that we can do and we have to do. And it's merely the question of, I would say, almost the human species survival. And I myself, just briefly, I am a social designer. I'm focused on designing and researching new and emerging social structures and interventions that go across disciplines and across sectors, specifically focused on well-being of people, other species, and the planet. So we are not only focusing on, or I'm not only focusing on people, but we know that everything is interconnected, and we are moving into the COP summit in Glasgow, and we see how things are really profoundly interconnected. And let's just put it briefly into the context. Context number one, we are really living in a unique time, and I am grateful for that we live in a time of a great turning, as David Kortem and Joanna Macy say, which is the time from an industrial growth society to the life-sustaining, or even better, life-enhancing society. And as such, it is clear that the well-being must be central. And I want to share how we look at the well-being. The WHO has a very good definition, or in the Constitution, it's a very holistic definition of health and well-being. Yet, unfortunately, we as humanity are really not practicing it. We are practicing it more in a, I would say, medical sense, looking at treatments and intervention, looking at the symptoms to treat the symptoms, just like we are trying to treat the symptoms when we are looking at sustainable development goals. So first of all, the second context I want to share, that we look at the health and well-being as not something that we have, but something that emerges in relationship between personal, social, and environmental. So there have been many discussion and growing about so-called relational well-being, and how do we tackle when we talk about the relational well-being. I want to pose the two questions, and I want us to challenge ourselves to imagine how our society would look like. First, what if care were our organizing principle instead of profit-making? Second, what if the well-being were prioritized over economic growth? And we believe with the Foundation Botnar that this is something that can open up our imagination to reconcile the past and think how we can share power individually and collectively. And art, clearly, without any doubt, has played a critical role. Art and culture really connect us with ourselves and with each other. As David Bohm, the quantum physicist, says, we are internally connected with everything, not externally. And it is these relationships that can heal and change the world. So what are we doing with the Botnar Foundation? Just a short example. I am currently in Cluj. For that very reason, I'm very excited to see Ștefan and Rarița and many, many other stakeholders here in Cluj. So the Botnar Foundation is a new, rather new, or one of the biggest Swiss foundations that is taking a systemic approach towards well-being. It's looking at the well-being as a relational well-being. And as such, we are trying to focus on working with intermediary cities and young population. Why young? Because we think that these are some leverage points. There are over 50% of population globally is below 30 years old, is 50% of population is below 30 years old. And intermediary cities are where the urban growth is happening. And we think that by focusing across disciplines and across sectors in the local action is that we can, together with the local stakeholders, collectively make a change. What we are doing in Cluj, we have been working for the last 2 years across public, private, civic, academic sectors, including various civic groups, including various institutions. And we are calling what we have been trying to bring to life is something that centers values in urban transition. Of course, art and culture are essential in that. We are looking at the values of care and values of trust and values of relationships. And these are all essential when we are talking about any aspect of well-being. And I'll be very interested actually to continue this communication and exchanges with all of you as we are experimenting this new social model, social experiments. How is it that we put care at the center? And you may be familiar with this wonderful little booklet, The Care Manifesto by the Care Collective, which is really nicely talking about the politics of interdependence, or politics of care, where care is central of everything is what we do. And in order to have some more space for conversation, I just want to close with another quote that I think, I hope can activate our imagination. This is by Diane de Prima, the American beat poet, who said, "The only war that matters," because we are in the wartime, that's no doubt, if the humanity is going to survive, if we don't really put the well-being into the center, she said, "The only war that matters is the war against imagination." And I think, and I really congratulate you, the Cluj Cultural Center, and all of you to provide these spaces for imagination. I only think that we need to be much more radical. We really have to open up our imagination and also bring others, who are doing it on the ground, but maybe not yet part of these conversations. And I'm really excited to continue working with you. We don't have a solution. I think the only solution can come by finding them together, designing them together for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. A very strong message. We thank you for that. Now we have 15 to 20 minutes left for a conversation. So I'm now inviting everyone who's listening and the panelists as well to ask any questions you are interested in, or to raise any comments you want. A question from my side, from all of you. Most of the things we said and most of the things we are doing are based on individual, or I don't know, existing efforts, existing structures, trying to redirect some of the budgets or some of the people to work on pilot projects, or to, I don't know, to grab some money from some place, from some budget line to redirect that for research in culture and well-being, and so on and so forth. So it's obvious that this is the way things are working right now. And my question is, how do we ponder this? hard measures like allocating budgets, making regulations, asking our institutions to deliver on this specific subject. So how do we balance the hard measures and these soft approaches that rely a lot on individual efforts, which are not funded or regulated or imposed in any way? How do we do this when scaling up? Are these individual efforts enough? Because most of the things we are doing don't have a budget and they are for free. We are trying to convince different institutions that they don't need to make an effort. It's very easy to work on culture and well-being. But as we know, when you are not making an effort, when you are not paying a price, you might not allocate the same attention. So how do we balance hard measures and this sort of individual efforts and sacrifices? Please, Nils.
Thank you very much, Ștefan. I think you hit on a really important question. I think there's a big challenge in this space where we kind of expect culture to be free because it's everywhere around us. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of illustrated to that to some extent. There's very good research emerging about how the culture sector kind of stepped up and supported people's individual mental health, collective mental health, through online culture, through online interaction, through dancing together alone, for instance, was one of the projects that I've heard about that was highlighted in this research. Stepped up to deliver a service without the necessary recognition on the one hand. I think maybe that recognition is beginning to change, but certainly without any funding that was attached to it, without the kind of requisite money being supported. So this was people volunteering, people kind of finding creative solutions to the challenge of lockdown, and thereby contributing to the greater well-being of many people. So I think that is a fundamental question. I'm not sure, as I think we said in the beginning, I don't think there is a magic solution to this problem. What I think we're in the middle of, though, is a kind of swelling momentum. So there's a lot of things that are beginning to happen. A lot of attention is being diverted onto this topic. People are beginning to, at the policy level, at the funding level, at the research level, people are getting there, becoming interested in diverting attention to it. So what I would say is that we probably need to see this as a reality for a little while longer. But I do think that things are changing, and I think wherever we find opportunities to promote this work, wherever we can tell the stories about how this work is impacting on people, that is going to be the way in which we change minds and consequently we change policies. And stories are what we are good at. So that's the kind of evidence is important. I work at the WHO. We have to kind of plug away at the quantitative evidence, but telling the stories is of the successes, showing how it impacts people, and gaining momentum through doing that is, I think, one of our biggest strengths.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to bring a perspective on this? So hard measures versus, okay, we have Monica and then Barbara. And and sorry, just to announce, someone from the audience, Katrina Antezana Juarez, who will have a question after we have this round of answers.
Thank you, Ștefan. Just to build on what Nils was saying, because we both share this perspective, maybe from an international organization. Indeed, we need to find this intersection between the individual and the collective. So it's very important to bring the individual voices that would not be heard otherwise through our channels. And I'm talking now on behalf of DG Education and Culture, of course. These are stories that inspire us. And then help these voices to give them an arena to inspire policymakers and politicians. But we always have to keep in mind that health and well-being, they are not only individual personal issues, they are very much connected to all our communities, and therefore they become also a political topic. And this is what I was trying to also say during my presentation. So it's not only about one particular human being or the responsibility of each of us, but it's about what we build as a society. And this is where I think the European institutions have the responsibility to, bring this discussion from all the inspiring examples that we have heard, and for many others that we want to discover, and transform this and help this build a better society. And I think we have the tools for that. Of course, we need again and again to reinforce the message and to work together with the sectors which are maybe less inclined to think about the role of culture in like the social care sector and the healthcare sector. But I think we are getting there. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's I believe in a few things from my experience, certainly in the power of networks. And I think that I worked in the health and well-being sectors all my life. I'm based in Geneva, the Center of Global Health, and yet I have not seen a profound shift yet that we could deliver. And I think it's what I'm seeing. For example, if we look at the environmental space, that has advanced much, much more than the health and well-being space. It's for various reasons, the background, public health focus, and so on and so forth. It's very different training. But I think it's important for us who are profoundly aware of this, that to expand the boundaries of caring, that we ourselves actively engage with other communities that can help us shift further, personal, social, environmental. So, for example, leveraging COP and Glasgow and various policy agenda around other spaces, because well-being is at the core of it all. That's one thing. The second thing I want to say, I think our society is really deeply challenged because of values. What do we value today? And I think this is, has to do with our democracy. They're being challenged just about everywhere. And I think it is all about values. So if we do put values of care at the center, it's easy to say, not easy to do. But I think that these are the conversations that need to begin more. And I think this is already happening. I see how challenging it is, including in Cluj, where we are trying to do that more with our social experiments. But I think this is clearly the value forward. And I think what you said, storytelling, what are these new stories? Can we imagine new stories and begin telling these new stories? And there are several experiments that are already living these new stories that are sometimes not visible. And the very last thing I want to say, education, 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 not only policymaker, but it has to start from very, very early on. I myself, I remember I stopped with arts and classes, very early on. Unfortunately, this has been my passion, but so I continued. But look at our schools, our educational system is profoundly flawed. This is not integrated. And I think if we want to do something for the future, that's a great leverage point. It's going to be difficult to change policymaker minds in a decade or two, but that's where we can, I think all of this in parallel, and we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Kornelia, please.
Oh, there are so many things that I would like to add or complement basically what the others were saying. I mean, definitely, I think there is definitely a momentum now after COVID. They have really seen that there is a place for culture in changing society, basically. And but of course, I see that it is going to be a longer process to change. But we have been quite successful, I think, for example, from going from the previous commission, when culture was not mentioned at all in their plans, while the current one already has it, and in the State of the Union they do talk about it. So I'm hoping that this trend is of course going to continue, and also soon let's say the health EU level the Santa is going to be opening up once the immediate urgency is done and people see what we have learned from all this. Yeah. You were mentioning the power of networks, and definitely where Culture Action Europe hopes to step in and also form other alliances as well. And I would also again put the emphasis also on the prevention and promotion side, again, where culture can really give even a better input, because of course it's also good in healing and curing, but as you were saying also, Barbara, earlier, that the society has to, we should actually not get into the state of being unwell, let's say, and that is where arts practices and culture steps in. You were mentioning you were mentioning the ecology or environmental aspects, where they really manage to be or manage to step further on, and that's actually what there is a campaign we have, Cultural Deal EU, which tries to reach similar results, let's say mainstreaming culture across societies and across all actions. We are just getting actually in November 18th a major policy event in the light of this, actually talking about how culture can contribute to the European Green Deal and so on, and also how actually we can mainstream culture across all those fields. So you are very well invited. I'm going to drop something about this in the chat.
Please do that, Kornelia. Thank you. Now we have a question from one of our participants. Katrina, you have the floor or the mic. I'm not sure how this is going to work. Please. Maybe you tell us a few words about yourself, introduce yourself.
Okay, I don't know if you see me. I see you.
We just hear you.
Okay.
But it's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't know if I can put my image. Yeah, I don't see any place to do it. I am psychologist and psychotherapist. I lived in several countries in my life, and I live now in Holland, but I am South American from origin. So I use the music therapy and art therapy in my sessions and the therapies I do with my patients. And I see that is a very flexible, and it is a tool that is very, very useful for me. In some cases when the people are stuck or they can express themselves, so you break that wall and afterwards you can work in the therapy more easily. So I am convinced of the power of that. But just as I said, I think you are talking about a movement, but I don't know if these occasions and these events we can call as movement. If we learn from the experience from the ecology, from the ecologists, they started as movement, and before, yeah, it was movement. Now it's social media, the tool. But so they started as movement. They were not listening. Nobody heard them because it was not a hard science. So after that, that science that was not a hard science because we couldn't have evidence database. So it started to talk about soft science. So they gathered evidence because with this experience, with this movement, the advocacy and all the other activities were just more easy. So I am asking myself, or I am asking you, if this is already a movement or is more initiatives. Because I hear from Ștefan that this is more small initiatives everywhere, but not yet a movement.
Thank you, Katrina. Very interesting point and very interesting parallel. If anyone from the panel wants to pick up on that, Nils, please.
Thanks, Ștefan, and also thanks to our colleague for the intervention. So I think this is a question of perspective. I think from one angle, from one perspective, it might not seem like a movement at all. There might not be a lot of things that are happening. It might seem very singular and incidental. From another perspective, and I'm not saying valid, but from the perspective, for instance, that I am at, from that perspective, there is, well, I mean, again, it depends on how you define a movement, but there's certainly a growing amount of momentum, and there's a growing amount of interest in this space of arts and health. We see funders who haven't previously been interested approach us. So the European Commission is interested in this space. There are indicators from the perspective of kind of parties that are coming towards this topic that would tell us that there's at the very least a groundswell of momentum. And where I think it is a movement is in the sense that in certain places, like for instance the UK, even in parts of the US, in Finland, as we've heard today, Scandinavia in general, there is really a growing kind of academic, political, and NGO kind of support for this type of activity. So I respect the fact that it's a perspective question. It's not a global movement. That I will absolutely agree with. But I think it has growing momentum, and in some parts it does strike me as something that is becoming a movement.
Thank you. We go back to Monica and Barbara.
Thank you. So yes, I wanted to come back to what Barbara was saying about David Baum. I don't know how you go from the internally connected to the externally connected to everything, but I want to make a parallel in terms of quantum physics. I wanted to make a parallel with audience development. I had the chance to work on this topic in the previous Creative Europe program, which was from 2014 to 2020. And in the beginning, it was not such a popular topic in many countries and regions of the EU. And it became, I don't know if we can call it a movement, but it became something very natural for cultural organizations and for cultural projects to think about this, how to engage with different audiences in a very profound way. I'm not talking about marketing techniques or bringing more visitors or audiences on your seats in the theater. So I would hope that now that we are working more on cultural participation from this point of view, well-being and health, and this is going to become again a very natural thing for cultural organizations to reflect on. But of course, I'm not putting all the pressure on you, because we can always say it's up to the artists, it's up to the cultural organizations, they should do the work. No, I think you have done so much during the pandemic, and indeed, as previous speakers have said, we have a window of opportunity now, or maybe even a door, because you have given us so much, and we have to keep insisting now with decision makers that the evidence is there, whether statistics or soft evidence stories, etc. And we have to build on that to also support the cultural sector to be able to do more for society, because it has to be balanced. There is a two-way street in this conversation. So I definitely hope it's going to become something very well spread in the future, this link between well-being and health and culture.
Thank you very much, Monica. We have Barbara, and then the closing remark from Rarița.
Thank you, Ștefan. It's so interesting. Maybe I wanted to share a story of the intervention that we did with European Union, with the Commissioner for Transport a few years ago, with the previous Commissioner, an artistic intervention with my dear friend Tomás Saraceno, Aeroscene community. It's a global community of Aeroscene. You can look it up on the internet. And the Commissioner was convening a major summit on transportation in Europe. So all stakeholders, financing, and transport is a very conservative sector, even more than health and well-being. Yet the summit started with the conversation and the intervention in the space between the artist and the commissioner, presenting the structure and the future of the world, where we can fly just with the energy of the sun and the energy of the planet Earth and the air. And everybody was so fascinated. But then one woman lifted a hand and said, but, this is amazing. But Tomás Saraceno, the artist, I don't understand your business model, was her question. And then Tomás said, this is a great question. I do not have one. It is you and me and everybody here and those that are not in the room that we will create it together. And I think it's this conversation, on an ongoing basis like today, and expanded community that can get us there. And that speaks to, in my opinion, to the way that we produce knowledge. I'm myself a scientist, both natural and social scientist, and I know how the evidence is developed, and I always struggle with how it is developed. And on top of that, we have so many other knowledge production ways. For example, our sensorial, emotional, spiritual, indigenous knowledge. And we don't know how to bring this into the policy making in the current, science-based policy informed, but these conversations are starting. I see a lot of these communities and discussions around the environment because it is such a crisis. And I think this is the way forward. I think to bring this forward, that this is not the only knowledge production. And from my experience, that what has really worked is not talking, but actually discussing it while you are living through an embodied experience that only culture can provide. It's a very different conversation when you are in the space when you are part of this intervention, because you have to embody it with your senses, with your emotions. And that's the time to have this conversation, because everybody senses differently. Humanly, you just have to respond differently. I'm not everybody, but I think that has worked from our experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Rarița, please.
Well, thank you so much for all these inspiring thoughts, and I felt somehow that that we could actually even close with Barbara's words, because they have been summing up so well what this shift that we are needing would require from all of us. Just to try a very brief answer to your question, Ștefan, when we were talking, when in our experimentation in the Art and Wellbeing project and before, we were all the time speaking about the importance of arts and culture for individual and community well-being, and we have seen that it's a very complex actual space in which the individual and the collective level they get together. But then we figure out that for a really structural change to happen, we need to also tackle on this intermediary level, to look at the organizations and how organizations work. And I don't mean only the skills that we need in the health sector or in the cultural sector to be able to work with people from, for instance, that face lifelong disease, but it is also about, and this would be my closing remark, about who is taking care of those that are the take carers. So in this case, I'm bringing back the attention to how much is the cultural sector actually embodying these values, as we know that there is so much overwork, burnout. So in the end, there is a need to be able to embody, as Barbara says, this value of care in the cultural sector. And for that, what I am calling for is that we need support frameworks for culture, exactly because it has a very different business model from all the other business that is dominating our society. We need this type of support structures that are very flexible and allow us as creators to engage with such processes on a long term without having to stick to very rigid project frameworks. And that would be my my final words here. I'm really grateful for all the valuable ideas and models that have been shared in our forum, and looking forward to go on this adventure.
Thank you, Rarița, and thank you everybody who's been contributing to the panel and from the audience as well. We are right on time. I thank you for this as well. And I want to share that I really miss meeting you with you in person, and I hope that we get to do that very, very soon. Thank you. We take a break now. At 1 p.m. CET, we are back with the open space, where artists and culture practitioners and everybody interested in well-being and health through art and culture are invited to join. We can share ideas there, we can network, and we can discuss how we communicate together after the forum. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you and working with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Denisa, are we off?